Sarah Thompson walked through the busy halls of Atlanta General Hospital, her colorful scrubs making a soft swishing sound as she moved. At 32 years old, she had already made a name for herself as one of the most caring nurse practitioners in the rehabilitation center. Her dark skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, and her braided hair was neatly tied back in a professional bun. It was just another Tuesday morning when Sarah checked her patient list. A new name caught her eye: James Chen, 34, partial paralysis from a rock climbing accident. She gathered her materials and headed to room 415, not knowing this routine checkup would change her life forever. When Sarah entered the room, she found a handsome Asian man sitting in a wheelchair by the window. Despite his condition, his eyes sparkled with life as he turned to greet her. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. I'm Sarah Thompson, and I'll be your nurse practitioner during your rehabilitation," she said, returning his smile. She noticed how he sat straight in his wheelchair, maintaining a dignified posture despite his challenges. "Please call me James," he replied, his voice friendly and confident. "And I hope you're ready for a challenge because I plan to work harder than any patient you've ever had." Sarah couldn't help but chuckle at his enthusiasm. As she began her assessment, she noticed something different about James. While many patients felt defeated by their conditions, he spoke about his future plans with excitement. He told her about his work as a software engineer and how he had already modified his home office to continue working. "The accident might have taken some of my mobility," James explained while Sarah helped him with his exercises, "but it can't take my spirit, or my terrible jokes." As if to prove his point, he told a horrible pun about computers that was so bad, Sarah couldn't help but laugh. During their first session, Sarah learned that James had been rock climbing in Colorado when equipment failure led to his fall. The accident had left him with partial paralysis from the waist down, but doctors were hopeful about his chances for partial recovery with intensive rehabilitation. As weeks passed, Sarah found herself looking forward to James's therapy sessions. He never complained about the difficult exercises, instead treating each small improvement as a major victory. His determination was infectious, and other patients in the rehabilitation center began to draw strength from his positive attitude. One day, while helping James with his arm strengthening exercises, he asked, "Sarah, do you believe in silver linings?" She paused, considering his question. "I try to. Why do you ask?" "Because this accident taught me to see life differently," he explained, pushing through another repetition. "Before, I was always rushing, climbing higher, working longer hours. Now, I notice the small things, like how the morning light hits the buildings, or how kind people can be when you let them in." Sarah felt something stir in her heart at his words. In her years of nursing, she had never met someone who faced such challenges with such grace and wisdom. She quickly reminded herself to maintain professional boundaries, but she couldn't deny that James was different from her other patients. The other nurses noticed it too. James always had a special smile for Sarah, and he worked twice as hard during their sessions together. When other staff members covered his therapy, he would ask about her, wondering if she was having a good day. Sarah tried to keep things professional, but she found herself sharing small details about her life during their sessions. Her love for jazz music, her dream of opening a small clinic someday, and stories about her large, loving family in Atlanta. 3 months into his rehabilitation, James had made remarkable progress. He could now move his upper body with much more strength and had even regained some sensation in his legs. During one of their sessions, he surprised Sarah by asking, "Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked you to have coffee with me, once I'm not your patient anymore?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She knew she should say no. She had always been careful about maintaining professional boundaries. But looking into James's honest, hopeful eyes, she found herself saying, "Ask me again on your last day of therapy. My answer might surprise you." Both of them smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of something special. After James completed his rehabilitation, Sarah finally agreed to that coffee date. They met at a small cafe near the hospital on a sunny Saturday morning. James had arrived early, positioning his wheelchair at a corner table with a good view of the entrance. When Sarah walked in wearing a yellow sundress, his face lit up with a bright smile. "You look different without your scrubs," James joked as Sarah sat down across from him. She laughed, feeling strangely nervous despite having spent months working with him. Their first real conversation outside the hospital was easy and natural. Hours passed as they talked about their lives, dreams, and families. James told Sarah about growing up in San Francisco with his Chinese immigrant parents, who had sacrificed everything to give him a good education. Sarah shared stories about her large Atlanta family and her journey to become a nurse practitioner. However, reality soon tested their budding relationship. When Sarah told her family about James, the reactions were mixed. Her mother, Linda, pulled her aside after Sunday dinner one evening. "Baby, are you sure about this?" Linda asked, concern clear in her voice. "Taking care of someone as a nurse is different from being in a relationship with them. It's going to be hard." Sarah felt her temper rise. "Mama, James isn't someone who needs taking care of. He's brilliant, independent, and makes me laugh more than anyone I've ever met." Her younger sister, Tanya, was more direct. "What about having children? Dancing at your wedding? There are so many things you might have to give up." Sarah stood in her mother's kitchen, looking at the worried faces of her family. "The only thing I'd be giving up is the chance to love someone amazing because I'm afraid of what other people might think." Meanwhile, James faced his own battles. One evening, as they watched the sunset from his apartment balcony, he grew quiet and distant. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, reaching for his hand. James hesitated before speaking. "Yesterday, I overheard someone at work saying you must be with me out of pity, that you're just being the caring nurse." His voice was heavy with pain. "Sometimes I wonder if they're right, if I can ever give you the life you deserve." Sarah turned her wheelchair to face him directly. "James Chen, look at me," she said firmly. "I'm not here because I pity you. I'm here because you make me see the world differently. Because you never let challenges stop you from living fully. Because when I'm with you, I feel more alive." Their relationship grew stronger as they faced each challenge together. James showed Sarah how he had modified his apartment with smart technology, proving his independence. Sarah involved him in family gatherings, where his charm and wit gradually won over even her most skeptical relatives. One breakthrough came during a family barbecue. Sarah's young nephew, Marcus, was fascinated by James' wheelchair. Instead of being uncomfortable, James showed the boy how it worked and even let him sit in it. "It's like a super cool race car," James explained, making Marcus laugh. "Sometimes life gives you different tools to work with. That doesn't make you any less awesome." Sarah's mother watched this interaction from the porch, her expression softening. Later that evening, she hugged James for the first time. "You're good for her," she whispered. "Thank you for loving my daughter." As months passed, they developed their own rhythm. They discovered new ways to do things together, like cooking side by side in James' accessible kitchen or going on rolling walks in the park. James taught Sarah about computer programming, while she shared her knowledge of healthcare. Their different backgrounds and experiences made their relationship richer, not harder. One evening, as they watched a movie at Sarah's apartment, James looked at her with determination in his eyes. "You know what I love about us?" he asked. "We never let anyone else write our story. We're writing it ourselves, every day." Sarah squeezed his hand, knowing that what they had was worth every challenge they faced. Their love wasn't about what they couldn't do. It was about everything they could do together. As spring turned to summer in Atlanta, Sarah and James's relationship blossomed like the magnolia trees lining the city's streets. One morning, Sarah arrived at James' apartment to find him in an unusually excited mood. He was dressed in a crisp blue button-down shirt, looking professional despite it being Saturday. "I have something to show you," he said, wheeling over to his home office. Sarah followed, curious about his enthusiasm. Inside, multiple computer screens displayed complex coding projects. "Remember how I told you I work in software? Well, I just got promoted to lead developer at my company." Sarah's face lit up with pride. "James, that's amazing." He grinned, his eyes sparkling. "That's not all. They're giving me a team to manage and doubling my salary. Sarah, I want you to know that my disability hasn't stopped me from building a successful career. I can provide a good life, despite what some people might think." Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair and took his hand. "I never doubted you for a minute. But you know that's not why I'm with you." "I know," he smiled, squeezing her hand. "But it feels good to show the world that being in a wheelchair doesn't define what I can achieve." Their relationship grew deeper as they shared more of their lives with each other. James attended family dinners at Sarah's parents' house every Sunday, where he taught her young nieces and nephews simple coding games. Sarah's mother, who had once been skeptical, now saved James's favorite sweet potato pie especially for him. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together in James' accessible kitchen, he spoke about his family in San Francisco. "My parents are coming to visit next month," he said, stirring the stir-fry in his wok. "They're traditional, but they're excited to meet you." Sarah felt nervous but happy. "Tell me more about them. I want to make a good impression." James chuckled. "Just be yourself, though Mom might quiz you about your dumpling-making skills." His expression grew more serious. "You know, after my accident, they wanted me to move back to California. They worried I couldn't have a full life on my own. Meeting you proved them wrong in the best way possible." When James's parents arrived, they brought warmth and acceptance with them. His mother, Mrs. Chen, immediately embraced Sarah, saying in accented English, "Our son smiles so much more in his video calls now. We know it's because of you." Mr. Chen was quieter, but showed his approval by teaching Sarah how to make authentic Chinese dumplings in James's kitchen. He had tears in his eyes when he told her, "After James's accident, we thought he would be alone. Thank you for seeing his heart, not his wheelchair." The two families came together one weekend for a big dinner. Sarah's soul food mixed with Mrs. Chen's Chinese dishes created a feast that represented their blending cultures. Around the table, conversations flowed in English and Chinese, with James translating and everyone laughing together. During the dinner, Sarah's young niece Maya asked innocently, "Uncle James, why did you choose Aunt Sarah?" The table grew quiet, but James smiled. "Because she saw me flying when everyone else thought I was falling," he answered. Sometimes the best love stories don't follow the usual path. Later that night, as they sat on James's balcony looking at the Atlanta skyline, Sarah felt complete peace. James reached over and took her hand. "You know what's funny?" he said. "People think you're amazing for loving someone in a wheelchair, but they don't see that you're amazing simply for being you. The wheelchair is just part of our story, not the whole story." Sarah leaned over and kissed him softly. "Our story is pretty great, isn't it?" "It's getting better every day," James replied, his eyes full of love and something else, a secret he was keeping that would soon change their lives forever. As they sat there together, the city lights twinkling below them, both Sarah and James knew that what they had found was rare and precious. Their love hadn't conquered his disability. It had simply shown that disability was never an obstacle to real love in the first place. James spent weeks planning the perfect proposal, wanting to surprise Sarah in a way that would show the world that love knows no boundaries. He enlisted the help of his physical therapy team and Sarah's sister Tanya to create something special. The plan was set for a charity event at the rehabilitation center where they first met. Sarah thought she was just attending to support the center's fundraising efforts. She wore a beautiful blue dress that James had specifically requested, not suspecting anything unusual. The event hall was packed with people, patients, medical staff, and supporters of the center. Sarah sat in the front row, proud to see James listed as one of the speakers. What she didn't know was that everyone else in the room was in on the surprise. When it was James's turn to speak, he wheeled onto the stage confidently. "Good evening, everyone. Today, I want to share a story about how this place changed my life. Not just because of the excellent medical care, but because it's where I met an amazing woman." Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm as people turned to look at her. James continued, "Many people think that being in a wheelchair limits what you can do. But I've learned that with creativity and love, you can do anything. Sarah taught me that." The lights dimmed, and soft music began to play. To Sarah's surprise, James wasn't alone on stage anymore. 4 other people in wheelchairs joined him, including some of his friends from physical therapy. They had been practicing for months in secret. What happened next took Sarah's breath away. The group began a choreographed wheelchair dance, moving in perfect synchronization to Ed Sheeran's Perfect. James led the routine, his wheelchair spinning and moving in graceful patterns across the stage. The dancers created heart shapes with their movements, their wheelchairs becoming part of the artistry rather than a limitation. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she watched James perform. She remembered their conversations about dancing, how he had once expressed regret about not being able to dance with her. Now he was showing her that dance could be beautiful in any form. As the music reached its peak, the other dancers moved to form a circle around James. He wheeled to the edge of the stage, directly in front of Sarah. The spotlight followed him as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah Thompson, his voice was clear and full of emotion. When I was at my lowest point, you showed me that life had more love to offer. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me for who I am, and you loved me completely. The room was silent except for the soft background music. James opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring that sparkled in the spotlight. Every day with you is an adventure. Every challenge becomes possible because we face it together. You've shown me that love doesn't need feet to dance or legs to stand. It just needs two hearts beating as one. Sarah was crying now, her hands covering her mouth in surprise. James continued, I may not be able to get down on one knee, but my heart kneels before you every day. Sarah Thompson, will you marry me? The entire room held its breath, waiting for her answer. Sarah stood up, her legs shaking with emotion. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, 1,000 times yes. She stepped onto the stage as the crowd erupted in cheers. James slipped the ring onto her finger, and she leaned down to kiss him, not caring that hundreds of people were watching. Their kiss was captured on dozens of phones, and later the video would go viral, touching hearts across the world. The other dancers returned to the stage, this time joined by more people from the audience: doctors, nurses, patients, and family members. They'd all dance together, some in wheelchairs, some on feet, creating a beautiful moment of unity and celebration. As Sarah and James held each other amid the celebration, he whispered, Thank you for making all my dreams come true. She smiled through her tears, You've made mine come true too. The proposal video spread quickly across social media, breaking down stereotypes and showing the world that true love knows no limitations. But for Sarah and James, it was simply the perfect beginning of their next chapter together. The wedding day arrived on a perfect spring morning in Atlanta. Sarah and James had chosen a beautiful garden venue that was fully accessible, with smooth paths winding through blooming azaleas and magnolias. Their ceremony would blend both their cultures, honoring their families and their unique love story. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, her sister Tanya helping her with the final touches of her dress. The gown was specially designed to look beautiful whether she was standing or sitting beside James in photos. Its flowing white fabric sparkled with tiny crystals, and red and gold embroidery honored James's Chinese heritage. You look like a princess, whispered Maya, her young niece who was the flower girl. Sarah smiled, touching the traditional jade pendant James's mother had given her to wear. Meanwhile, in another room, James was getting ready with his best man. He wore a handsome black tuxedo, with a red pocket square matching the embroidery on Sarah's dress. His wheelchair had been decorated with elegant ribbons in their wedding colors. Nervous? His best friend Mike asked. James shook his head, smiling. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about something. Sarah is my destiny. The ceremony space looked magical. Red and gold lanterns hung from tree branches, while white flower petals created a path wide enough for James's wheelchair. Guests sat on both sides, a beautiful mix of Sarah's large African-American family and James's Chinese relatives who had flown in from California and China. As the music started, James took his place at the front. His breath caught when he saw Sarah walking down the aisle. She was more beautiful than he had ever imagined, and her smile lit up the entire garden. When she reached him, Sarah's father placed her hand in James's, saying softly, Take care of each other. The moment was so powerful that there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. The ceremony combined traditions from both families. They had a traditional Chinese tea ceremony, with Sarah serving tea to James's parents from her wheelchair to show respect. They jumped the broom, an African-American tradition, with Sarah's brothers helping James' wheelchair cross it smoothly alongside Sarah. When it was time for their vows, James spoke first. Sarah, you saw past my wheelchair and into my heart. You showed me that love has no boundaries. I promise to spend every day making you as happy as you've made me. Sarah wiped away tears as she said her vows. James, you taught me that true love doesn't need to follow anyone else's rules. Your strength, your humor, and your heart make every day an adventure. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your love for all our days. Their first kiss as husband and wife was met with cheers and applause. James's mother cried happy tears while Sarah's family whooped with joy. The reception was a joyful celebration of their two cultures. The buffet had both soul food and Chinese dishes. The DJ played everything from R&B to Chinese pop music. James's young cousins taught Sarah's family traditional Chinese dances, while Sarah's brothers showed James's relatives how to do the electric slide. For their first dance, James had another surprise. With help from his physical therapist, he had practiced a special wheelchair dance. Sarah sat with him in his lap as they moved together to At Last by Etta James, spinning and gliding across the dance floor. Their love transformed what could have been a simple, slow dance into something magical. During the reception, Sarah's mother stood to make a toast. When Sarah first told me about James, I worried about the challenges they would face. But watching them together, I realized something. Love doesn't see disabilities. It sees possibilities. These two beautiful souls had taught us all what real love looks like. James's father then raised his glass and spoke in Chinese, with James translating. In our culture, we believe that marriages are destiny, decided by invisible red threads. Today proves that these threads connect hearts, not circumstances. As the evening ended, Sarah and James danced under the lantern light, surrounded by the love of their families. They had created something beautiful, not just a wedding, but a testament to the power of love to bridge all differences. "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Chen?" James asked softly. Sarah leaned down to kiss him. "With you. Always." 3 months into their marriage, Sarah and James had settled into a comfortable routine in their new home. They had chosen a modern apartment with wide doorways and an open floor plan, making it easy for James to move around. The place perfectly reflected their shared life. Her medical books next to his computer magazines, Chinese artwork hanging beside family photos from Atlanta. One morning, as sunlight streamed through their kitchen windows, Sarah was making breakfast while James worked on a puzzle of coding problems for his team. It was a typical Saturday morning until James' wheelchair got stuck on the new rug they had bought. "Need help?" Sarah asked, reaching for his chair. "I got this," James said with determination. He maneuvered his chair skillfully, finding a different angle to move across the rug. Sarah smiled, remembering how she used to rush to help him with everything. Now she understood that sometimes love meant stepping back and letting him do things his way. Their days were filled with small victories and shared laughter. James had programmed their entire apartment with smart technology he designed himself. He could control the lights, temperature, and even start the coffee maker from his phone. "Who needs legs when you have a smart home?" he often joked. Sarah's family visited often, filling their home with noise and love. During one visit, her nephew Marcus asked why Uncle James's computer had so many screens. James spent the afternoon teaching the boy basic coding, his eyes lighting up as Marcus created his first simple game. "You're really good with kids," Sarah said later that evening. James squeezed her hand. "Maybe someday we'll have our own." They had been discussing starting a family, knowing it might be challenging but feeling ready to face any obstacles together. Their marriage wasn't without its challenges. One evening, James had a rough day at work when a new client questioned his ability to lead a project because of his disability. He wheeled onto their balcony, needing some space. Sarah found him there, staring at the Atlanta skyline. Without saying a word, she pulled up a chair and sat beside him. After a few minutes, James spoke. "Sometimes I still get angry. Not at being in this chair, but at how some people see me." "Then we'll prove them wrong together," Sarah replied, "just like we always do." The next week, James's project won his company a major contract. Sarah surprised him with a celebration dinner, inviting both their families. His mother made her famous dumplings, while Sarah's mom brought her signature mac and cheese. It was a perfect blend of their lives. They learned to navigate physical intimacy with patience and creativity. Sometimes James had bad days when his body wouldn't cooperate, but Sarah never made him feel less than whole. "I fell in love with your heart and your mind," she would say. "Everything else is just details." Their home became known among friends as the place where everyone was welcome. James' wheelchair basketball teammates would come over for game nights, mixing easily with Sarah's colleagues from the hospital. Their different worlds merged seamlessly, creating a community that celebrated their love story. One Sunday morning, as they shared coffee on their balcony, a comment on their viral proposal video caught James's attention. It was from a young man in a wheelchair who wrote that their story gave him hope for finding love. "Look at that," James said, showing Sarah his phone. "We're giving others hope without even trying." Sarah leaned down to kiss him, That's because real love stories don't need to follow a script, they just need to be real. Their life together was different from what either had imagined before meeting each other. Instead of fancy dates, they enjoyed cooking together in their accessible kitchen. Rather than long walks on the beach, they went on rolling walks in the park, where James would often race with neighborhood kids who thought his wheelchair was cool. Every night before bed, they had a ritual. Sarah would sit in James's lap in his wheelchair, and they would dance slowly to one song. It didn't matter that their dancing didn't look like other couples. It was perfectly them. "I love our life," James said one evening during their dance. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "Me too, every single part of it." Their love story was teaching the world that the best kind of love doesn't try to fix or change. It simply accepts and celebrates what is. 6 months into their marriage, James had been acting mysterious for several weeks. He spent extra time at physical therapy, claiming he needed additional exercises for his back. Sarah noticed he was making secret phone calls and quickly ending them when she entered the room, but she trusted him completely and didn't question it. One Thursday evening, James wheeled into their bedroom while Sarah was getting ready for bed. "Clear your schedule for Saturday night," he said with a grin. "I'm taking you somewhere special for our half-year anniversary." "Really? Where are we going?" Sarah asked, curious about the twinkle in his eyes. "It's a surprise. Just wear that red dress I love," James replied, being purposely vague. When Saturday arrived, Sarah put extra care into her appearance. The red dress James requested was one she had worn on their first official date, and it held special memories. She paired it with the jade necklace his mother had given her at their wedding. James looked handsome in a black suit, his eyes shining with excitement and something else. Nervousness. He seemed unusually anxious as they left their apartment, checking his phone several times in the elevator. Their accessible van pulled up to Atlanta's most elegant restaurant, the Golden Room. It was famous for its rooftop dining area and had a reputation for being nearly impossible to get reservations for. Sarah gasped when she realized where they were. "James, how did you manage to get a reservation here?" He smiled mysteriously. "I have my ways, but first, I thought we could enjoy the view from the rooftop garden. They have a special elevator that can take us up." The restaurant staff seemed to be expecting them. A friendly hostess led them to a private elevator, and soon they were emerging onto the rooftop garden. The Atlanta skyline sparkled around them, and strings of tiny lights twinkled overhead. The space was surprisingly empty of other guests. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, taking in the sight of the city lights below them. The air was warm with a gentle breeze, and soft music played from hidden speakers. James wheeled to the center of the rooftop, positioning himself near a particularly beautiful arrangement of flowers. "Sarah," he said softly, "these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me that love has no limits." Sarah smiled, touching his cheek gently. "You've made me just as happy." "But," James continued, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "there's something I've been working on. Something I've wanted to do since our wedding day." Sarah noticed he was gripping his wheelchair's armrests tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Before she could ask what was wrong, James pressed a button on his chair, and additional stabilizing wheels quietly extended from its sides. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her heart beginning to race. "Do you trust me?" James asked, his eyes locked with hers. "With my life," she answered without hesitation. James took a deep breath. "Then stand right there and watch." He pressed another button on his wheelchair, and mechanical braces quietly unfolded around his legs. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was about to happen. Tears filled her eyes as James gripped the handles on his armrests. The rooftop was completely silent except for the soft music and the distant sound of city traffic below. The lights of Atlanta twinkled around them like stars, waiting to witness what would happen next. James's face showed intense concentration as he prepared for something he had been practicing in secret for months. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding, not daring to move or speak. The moment hung in the air between them, filled with hope, love, and the possibility of something miraculous about to happen. James took one final deep breath, ready to give Sarah the surprise of her life. "Happy anniversary, my love," he whispered, and began to move. Time seemed to stop on that rooftop as James, with intense concentration, slowly began to rise from his wheelchair. The mechanical braces supported his legs as he carefully pushed himself upward. Sarah watched in amazement, tears streaming down her face, as her husband achieved what doctors had once said might be impossible. He was standing. The process was careful and deliberate, each movement showing months of secret practice and determination. James's arms trembled slightly with effort, but his face showed pure joy as he reached his full height. He stood 6 feet tall, supported by the advanced mechanical braces he had helped design with a medical technology company. "Oh my God, James," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "How did you?" "I've been working with a new type of mobility brace," James explained, his voice tight with concentration. "Remember all those extra physical therapy sessions? This is what I was really doing. The company let me test their prototype, and I've been practicing for months." Sarah stepped closer, her hands shaking as she reached for him. James smiled, his eyes shining with tears of his own. "But wait," he said. "There's more." He pressed another button on a remote attached to his wrist, and their wedding song began playing through the rooftop speakers. With careful movements, James extended his hand to his wife. "Sarah Chen," he said softly, "may I have this dance?" Unable to speak through her tears, Sarah nodded and stepped into his embrace. They began to sway gently to the music, James's braces whirring quietly as they helped him move. It wasn't the most graceful dance. His movements were limited and careful, but to Sarah, it was more beautiful than any ballroom dance could ever be. "I wanted to give you this," James whispered as they moved slowly together. "One dance where I could hold you in my arms while standing. One dance where I could look into your eyes without having to look up." Sarah pressed her face against his chest, hearing his heartbeat. "You didn't need to do this for me. I love you exactly as you are." "I know," James smiled. "That's exactly why I wanted to do it. Because you never asked for it, never expected it, never made me feel like I needed to change. Your love gave me the courage to try things I never thought possible." As they danced, James told her about the mobility brace project. He had been working with the company not just as a test subject, but as a software engineer, helping to program the brace's movement algorithms. It wasn't a cure. He would still use his wheelchair most of the time, but it gave him the ability to stand and walk for short periods. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked, looking up at him. "Because I wanted to give you a moment of magic," he replied. "Like the ones you give me every day just by being you." They danced for another few minutes until James needed to sit back down. Sarah helped him settle into his wheelchair, and they both noticed their dinner was being served at a beautifully decorated table nearby. Over dinner, they talked about everything: the months of secret practice, the falls and failures before success, the hope and determination that kept James going. Sarah listened, falling in love with him all over again as she understood the depth of his dedication. "You know," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand, "every time I think I couldn't love you more, you prove me wrong." James squeezed her hand. "That's my job as your husband, to keep surprising you with new reasons to love me." They stayed on the rooftop late into the night, sharing dessert and dreams under the stars. Their love story had never been about limitations or disabilities. It had always been about seeing the possibilities in each other, about finding strength in their differences, and about writing their own definition of perfect love. As they finally headed home, Sarah resting in James's lap as he wheeled them to their van, she whispered, "Thank you for my surprise." James kissed her softly. "Thank you for giving me a life full of reasons to keep trying new things. With you, every day feels like a miracle worth working for." Their story became a reminder to the world that true love doesn't need to follow normal paths. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that write their own rules, break their own barriers, and prove that with enough love and determination, anything is possible.